Hi guys, me again, the HEMA reviews guy. Today I will bring you something that I already kinda did, so a review of the Neyman Heavy Fitter. Now before I actually start, a couple of caveats for this. This is no longer available. They made an upgraded version that has a fuller, so that it's a little bit more flexible, which is a very good thing, and they call it Morholt, I believe. So, this is a sword that I got a discount on. Now it costs, well, the equivalence costs 330 euros. Before it was, I think, 250 euros. And when I got the sword, I just ordered the sword and I told them, just send me the model that you think will be nicest. They sent a model with rings on, and the rings were very sturdy, but they were kinda small, so I couldn't put my thumb with the gloves on through, so I decided to take it off. This changed the point of balance more towards the point, and I'll get to that. So first off, let's just start with the basic specs of the sword, so the numbers. The sword is about 130 centimeters long, with a 99 centimeter blade and about a 30 centimeter handle. It weighs around 1.65 kilograms, so it is quite heavy, and this one has a point of balance on 13.5 centimeters. Let me show you that. However, yeah, so very far forward. That is non-standard, however, it is because I took off the thingies. What do you call them? The rings. Otherwise, you can get these, well, you could get them in 8, 10, or 12 centimeter point of balance variants. Now, the forward rotational node is at the point. I hope you can see that. So, bam! It's at the point, so that's as it should be. The vibrational nodes, one is over here, so where it should be, like at the heel of your palm, and the other one about here. So both of these are where they need to be. All in all, this is a, you know how you have swords that are really heavy, but they are poorly made, so they don't follow the design principles of actually making a sword? This is not one of those. This is a heavy sword that is made like a sword should be made. So we'll get to that and why I like this sword and what I don't like about them in a second. So we went through the basic specifications. Now let's take a look top to bottom what it has. It has a pommel that is a sense stopper. It's actually quite nice. I have no major issues with it. Right now it's very rusted because I'm just back from my vacation and it rusted while I was there and I have to clean it, so don't mind that. It has no facets though. I really like faceted pommels just because it allows me, when, especially if you have a glove that kind of slips, it allows you to feel where your sword is better and to manipulate it a bit better, but still nothing wrong with this pommel. The handle, when it arrived, was very thick, so it was made for very big hands, and it had very thick leather. It has the thickest leather I have seen on a sword handle so far. It was actually so thick that when I got a strike on it, it didn't get through the leather, which is the first time that happened. That also caused the shape of the handle to be a little bit irregular because it's much more difficult to actually work with a leather that's that much thicker. The leather was nice to the touch, it felt good. It felt different because it was so thick, but once you get used to it, you can see that it's actually a high quality leather. It's not just some bullshitty gimmick, and they made it so that you don't have to replace the leather like every 2 months, which I'm sure you know. That's why actually fitters with cord wraps are so popular, because you don't need to replace them as often. And it had a vague anatomic shape, but I took everything apart and I shaved off a lot of the excess wood. Now we'll get to the handles a bit later because they changed how they make them. I'm just telling you how I got the sword, which is no longer available, remember, or is available in a different kind of model. The crossguard is very sturdy. It didn't start to rattle at all, but it does get bent. So as you can see here, this one is bent, this one is kind of straight, but every 2 or so trainings after some heavy sparring, I needed to take another sword or a hammer or something and just hammer it back into shape because it would get bent. So this is about, maybe it was just slightly more bent at the worst, but this happens after a couple of training sessions and you have to bend it back. That's because it's relatively thin and it's made out of mild steel. Now it's made out of mild steel and not heat treated, just so that you can bend it back. It's definitely not as bad as it was with the Mods faders, but it is still a nuisance. Next we have the shield. I really like this type of shield. It catches the blade well, it protects your thumb nicely, so it's good. And we have the blade. The blade has a hexagonal section, which helps with the burrs in the blade, and the steel seems to be of a high quality. So of course you can only tell just how of a high quality the steel was after it breaks, but so far I've had no problem. There were no sets taken, there are no deep notches in the blade, and it seems to ned very nicely. There is no fuller, however, which makes for a relatively stiff blade. So I'm not sure how you can see this, but for example, if I put my weight on it, it bends that much, yeah, and that was, let's say, 80% of my weight. I weigh about 70 kilograms. So when I did, because I did actually spar with this sword, which is not something I recommend, but when I did full strikes, the sword did actually bend. Like this it bent more than it does in static tests, right? But they were very uncomfortable stabs for the opponent, of course. And I do believe that in a tournament setting where adrenaline runs high, this could cause injuries in the stab, like a cracked rib or something. But this is not a sword that is meant for tournaments or heavy sparring. This is a sword that Neyman made specifically to train with, and in that regard, it is fucking amazing. I love this sword to train with, just because of how forward balanced it is. So it's not really that heavy. Like, I've had heavier faders that I liked. 1.65 kilograms, it's okay, it's on the heavier side, but it's fine. However, the 12 or 13 or whatever point of balance that you have is what makes this sword feel heavy. It feels like, it feels very, very solid. So you might have seen an article now by, I think it was Mike Edelson, that said that you shouldn't really train with heavier swords if you can't handle them. And while I agree for that, for sparring purposes, I would say that you should train with heavier swords so that you can learn to handle them. Of course, given the prerequisites of having enough strength to actually stop the sword where you want to, but it does help with the mechanics of striking a whole damn lot. It's basically a feedback machine. So whenever you do a strike, I have very low ceilings here, so I can't really swing it, so I'm just gonna do a Mittelhauen. Whenever you do a strike, you can always feel where your strike is, where it was and where it's going. Which, for example, with some of the most popular faders, the Regenia standards, I can't feel that well, and it bugs me. And this is excellent because when you are learning a motion, you want to know exactly how your sword is moving so that you can make corrections. And this is something that will teach you how your body moves in regards to your sword, or actually the other way around, how your body moves your sword, which is absolutely amazing. The other thing that it does is it exponentiates your mistakes. So if you overextend your arm, you are going to feel that immediately. And you won't be doing that again because you will feel that it's wrong. It will be very unpleasant. And that's something I think a lot of practitioners need, because if you learn to do something that you don't feel is wrong but accumulates in an injury, that's gonna result in some very bad times. So if you strike so that your elbow extends all the way and locks, that's gonna put immense stress on your tendons. If you break your wrist when you do strikes, so if you do an Unterhau and you end up like this, that is going to result in possibly an inflamed wrist or something. And when you do it with this sword, it's so much easier to feel when you do that. And yes, it is much more uncomfortable if you do it once or twice, but it helps you prevent yourself from doing that in the future. So I would say that this sword is something that every single training club should have at least one or two of, so that more advanced people, or let's say intermediate to advanced people, can start to perfect their technique and can start really getting, how would you call it, a feedback loop, a self-feedback loop, because this allows you to feel what you do wrong. A lot of other swords don't really do it, and they definitely don't do it to an extent like this. So if I would have to grade the sword, like an overall grade, I would give it a 9 right now. But that's, again, a caveat, not for tournaments. It is definitely not for tournaments. You will cause concussions, broken ribs, whatever, especially with 12 centimeter point of balance. Definitely don't allow this on tournaments, and don't take it to tournaments if you are a fighter. However, as a training sword, it's great. So aesthetic-wise, nothing special. I give it a 7. It just looks like a regular feather that has been CNC'd probably. So absolutely nothing stunning about it. A relatively minimalistic but nice design. So yeah, I think 7 is a fair grade. As far as safety goes, it gets a 6. That's why it gets a 9 altogether, actually, because it is very stiff. It strikes very heavily, and it can cause injury if not controlled. So it's not a very safe sword, but it was never meant to be a safe sword. Also, to touch on that, the crossguard, if you get into grappling and stuff like that, it doesn't have a button end. It just has a regular crossguard end, which is okay-ish, but it's not the best. Oh yeah, and what do you call it? The transition between the crossguard and the thumb grip. Now on this sword, I couldn't tell because I took off the rings. However, one of our clubmates got one, and I got the new Galahad feather. It's very nice. So very good transition made here. The edge here is just slightly rounded on those swords, so you don't feel any kind of scraping when you go into the thumb grip. So that's also well made. So safety 6, aesthetics 7, handling I give it an absolute 10, again for what it is. In sparring, not so much. It's actually relatively agile when you attack. However, when you try to defend and return from an attack or defend several strikes at once, you suddenly feel just how forward the point of balance is, and you have to bring it into your defense, which makes you a lot slower. But handling, for what it was meant to do, because remember, I am judging this on what it was meant to do, 10 out of 10. Extremely good. Now, value for money. This was 250 euros when I bought it, and it was definitely worth the 250 euros. The new ones are 330 euros, and I will have to see for those what kind of a value for money is. So this is basically the best training sword I've had so far. And I love giving it to I'm an instructor in a club, so I love giving it to the people I train with when they do something wrong, because often when they use like 1.5 kilogram, 8 centimeter point of balance swords, they don't really feel what they did wrong. With this one, they do. So yeah, overall, a 9 out of 10 for this sword. I love it, I really enjoy it. I just don't think it's a solo sword. You definitely need a different sword for heavy sparring and tournaments. So until next time, have a good one, and I hope this was useful to you.